Come with me if you want your franchise to live. I love the Terminator series. Well, I feel like a lot of people say that, but actually mean I really love Terminator 1 and 2 and see the other films out of a misplaced obligation and naive but genuine hope that this new film will live up to my rosy memories of Terminator 2. And yeah, it's kind of like that for me too. But I also find the post-T2 films to be fascinating explorations into the increasingly desperate mind of Hollywood. The Terminator franchise has everything going for it on paper. Name brand recognition, a huge amount of pop cultural cachet, an easily marketable premise, and one of this generation's most iconic stars to anchor the series. But for some reason or another, they can't get the magic back. Each Terminator film has seen diminishing returns commercially, and it feels like the franchise may finally be over. You thought I was going to say terminated, didn't you? It's not that kind of channel. Okay, it is that kind of channel, but I'm saving my puns. You're not the boss of my puns. Or was I? Oh, right, the abject failure of the Terminator franchise. It's been sad to see. What was once a vibrant and interesting blend of visceral action and grimly effective sci-fi horror has become just as tired and meaningless and weightless as the umpteenth Friday the 13th film. But to understand why the post-James Cameron Terminator sequels don't work, we have to briefly explain what made them irresistible. There's something inherently beautiful and airtight about the first two Terminator films. They create a large and complex world and inhabit them with small, well-drawn characters. The story has both global and personal stakes, but the personal stakes always come before the global ones. The Terminator may be an edge-of-your-seat cat-and-mouse game about a young woman trying to survive an invincible killing machine, but it's also a fish-out-of-water buddy movie about love, humanity, and discovering the person you're meant to be. While T2 may be about stopping Judgment Day, it's really about young John Connor finding a father figure in a stable family unit. The smaller scale story always anchors the larger one. The films also work as a lovely, self-contained mirror of each other. In fact, if you have someone in your life who has no cultural knowledge of Terminator and Terminator 2, sit them down without any preamble and show them these two films back to back. There are twists in Terminator 2 that were necessary from a marketing level to spoil, and I can tell you from personal experience that the moment the T-800 says "Get down" in Terminator 2, it'll blow your friend or loved one's mind. Why do the first two films work so well together? It's a call and response, a question and an answer. The Terminator is about the oncoming storm, the inevitability of fate. You can make small changes to your destiny, but everybody ends up in the same place. It's a horror movie with a nice little twist of time-traveling sci-fi. But Terminator 2 analyzes the message of the first film and refutes this. It uses the trauma caused by the events of the original as a chance to explore deeper themes. Where the Terminator is fatalistic, Terminator 2 is hopeful. Where T1 is dark, T2 brings light. T2 also revisits the relationship of man versus machine in a way that is more insightful than the Terminator. It places the onus of humanity's destruction on humanity itself. The machines don't come out of thin air. They're creations of mankind designed to do the thing we sadly do best: kill. Cameron takes the iconic line from the first film seriously. The future's not set. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. It turns that phrase into a statement of purpose, a rallying cry. Through their choices and actions, our heroes are able to change their destinies for the better, and then get to face a future of their own design. It's a deeply satisfying triumph with a sense of open-ended finality. And that finality is one of many pieces of cinematic kryptonite that has plagued the subsequent installments. In order to make a sequel to Terminator 2, you must fundamentally reject the themes that make it so resonant. By that standard, any sequel to Terminator 2 can't help but be bad. Is that it? Did I do it? I did it! Hey, thanks for watching! Please like and subscribe and... Oh, there's still like 8 pages of the script left, huh? So, why attempt the impossible? Why try to make another Terminator movie if the story's over? Oh? How many million? 500 million? In 1991. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, yeah. I'm being told that it's lots and lots of money. Terminator 2 was a massive hit. It took in over $500 million worldwide, which would be almost $1 billion in 2020. And to make matters more interesting, the studio that produced T2, Columbia TriStar, no longer had the rights. So this enormous money-printing machine was sitting, unattended and essentially unowned, just waiting for another studio to flip the switch. What we'll find, though, is that Terminator is a monkey's paw of a franchise. It bops around from studio to studio and seems designed to bankrupt the production companies that finance the sequels. It's the same hubris every time. They think they can plan their own little trilogy and have the money machine print them billions, but the further you get from Terminator 2, the more they try to emulate it. And the more they try to emulate it, the more bored audiences become. Each film has to work overtime to clear the reputation of the last, and it's led to the series trying almost every trick in the book to change its fate. You see, there are a few ways to kickstart an ailing franchise, and Terminator runs the gamut. You've got the direct sequel, the time skip, the soft reboot, and the legacy sequel. Each of these attempts are also great time capsules of Hollywood as a whole, so let's look at each Terminator sequel and what we can learn from them. Heads up, I'm going to spoil all of these movies, so if you don't want to know, now's the time to duck out. Terminator 3 picks up 15 years after T2 and introduces the one poison pill concept that will wreck the rest of this franchise. You see, Judgment Day is inevitable. Destroying Cyberdyne didn't stop anything, it just delayed it. This excuse also allows them to keep upping their game when it comes to adversary Terminators. That's one huge problem with the Terminator sequels right there. The villains. They're never satisfying. You can't out Robert Patrick. He has a menace and an intelligence to his performance that's unmatchable, and the danger of him is his simplicity and stealth. He could be anywhere or anyone. It's that horror element that ties the second film to the first pretty nicely. Our villain in this one is the TX, who is basically just a Terminator with liquid metal around them. This is pretty much where the innovation ends in Terminator baddies. In 2003, a sequel like this wasn't entirely out of place, and it was mostly fueled by Arnold Schwarzenegger's desire to right the sinking ship of his career. He had quite a few creative and financial misfires, and a new big-budget Terminator trilogy could have been just the thing to revive his film career if he hadn't, gone into politics immediately after this thing was only a modest hit. You see, James Cameron had wanted to make Terminator 3, but lost the rights to the film in a deliriously complicated bankruptcy situation with Carolco, the company that produced Terminator 2. Carolco went bankrupt, the major studios all fought for their film library, and somehow at the very last second, the two guys who started Carolco managed to create another company seemingly out of thin air and spent a whole bunch of cash to retain their rights. This managed to make James Cameron mad enough to quit the project, but he gave Arnold his blessing to go on without him. This was the beginning of the endless end for the Terminator series. Without Cameron at the helm, the film was given to director Jonathan Mostow, a filmmaker so generic that you probably didn't realize that I just used a picture of John Landis instead. I can't find an image of him that's both A, free to use, and B, large enough to be recognizable. Seriously, go to his IMDb page, his profile picture is tiny. He got his college friends, John Brancato and Michael Ferris, to write the film. They're the writers of the pretty phenomenal David Fincher movie The Game, and absolutely nothing else of value ever again. If I ever see them on the street, I'm asking for the money I spent on tickets to see Surrogates back. Come to think of it, Jonathan Mostow directed Surrogates too. Welcome to Surrogates Talk, the only video on YouTube that's going to spend more than 20 seconds talking about the 2009 Bruce Willis film Surrogates. It's a very bad movie. It fills me with a lot of anger. It's also the moment that I realized that Bruce Willis just wasn't trying anymore. This concludes Surrogates Talk. Come back next time for Cop Out Talk, the show where we talk about how film school Corey had a nervous breakdown after he realized that his at-the-time favorite director could let him down so much that it made him switch majors into graphic design. Anyway, upon rewatch, Terminator 3 was definitely better than my memory of it. Surprisingly, there's a lot to love here. Even if the script is a little too jokey, it commits to its 2 or 3 interesting story threads. Claire Danes is great, even though she doesn't have enough to do. It gives us a genuinely horrifying and affecting rendition of Judgment Day. And director Jonathan Mostow is admirably good at nailing the big tentpole action set pieces with a minimum of CG. But maybe that's just misplaced nostalgia for a more tangible bygone era of action films where things, had weight and stakes. I am very quickly becoming a very grumpy old man. At this point, if movie theaters were safe to be in right now, I'd watch just about anything and be happy with it. The crane chase in particular feels like something that Justin Lin would do in a Fast and Furious movie, only it's slow and bone-crunching. There has always been a real opportunity for the series to take advantage of the newest tech to create stunning, visceral set pieces. The best Terminator fight scenes may involve big things crunching other big things, but there's always a tactile, human-level interaction that helps to keep the stakes suitably personal. But as budgets balloon and the criteria for what an audience considers spectacle changes, we've seen the films rely too much on whiz-bang CG and big, clunky action moments that feel impersonal and muddy. What works most about this weird $170 million lark, though? Its commitment to showing us Judgment Day. If you're gonna just totally trash the core principles of Terminator 2, you better have a reason and a plan. And in a way, Terminator 3 closes the loop with minimal time travel malarkey. We see a story foretold in Terminator 1, subverted and delayed with hope in Terminator 2, and brought to its inevitable grim climax in Terminator 3. It's almost like an inverse Star Wars trilogy. Terminator 3 was mildly disappointing financially. It's weird to say that about a movie that made $433 million, but it grossed slightly under its budget in the US, and this was the era where international box office was gravy and the US take was the main course. The cracks were already starting to form, but it's Terminator, right? Certainly we can make this work. Well, much like the time travel corrupted timeline of the franchise, here's where things start to get complicated. The co-founders of C2 Pictures, the company that replaced Carol Co., didn't really get along anymore. Their infighting led to the rights to Terminator being sold off to yet another production house called the Halcyon Company. Fun fact, Andrew Vajna, one of the co-founders of Carol Co., helped extremist right-wing Hungarian President Viktor Orban cement his hold on his country's news media after he left Hollywood. Hungary is sliding into authoritarianism pretty quickly and lost its status as a democracy in May of 2020. Wait, sorry, horrifying facts, genuinely distressing facts. Anyway, the Halcyon Company decided to ditch everybody's contracts and start from scratch. With Arnold in the California governor's house, it was time to focus on the real main character of this franchise. That's right, and by that I mean Marcus Wright, a character we've never met that's somehow super important now, and he's played by the ever-charismatic and not at all generic Sam Worthington. Folks, welcome to the first of 3 attempts to salvage this flaming mess. I give you. Terminator Salvation's lack of Arnold meant that they could do one of 2 things. Give us an entirely new Terminator to start caring about, or set the whole thing during the future war and finally show us how John Connor became the leader of the human resistance. And the film says, "Por qué no los dos?" and tries to do those simultaneously, and fails on both counts. Sam Worthington's man-trapped in a Terminator character is flat. Flat. It also doesn't help that the screenplay went through half a dozen rewrites and got tangled up in the Writers Guild strike of 2007, which forced Jonathan Nolan, best known for, mostly good movies and TV, to have to lead the production mid-shoot. He was helping to rewrite scenes on the fly, so his departure left the entire film in one hell of a lurch. Do you have any vague memories of Conan O'Brien spinning his ring on the desk in lieu of actual jokes to deliver on TV for like 3 months? Same strike. If you go back and look at a lot of movies from 2008 to 2009 that had really terrible structure, now you know why. This screenplay problem left the film with 2 half-completed ideas. Nolan was brought on to flesh out John Connor's character, who played more of a side role in the original screenplay, which sounds like just a charming and lovable idea that would have made for a movie that wasn't at all dull and pointless. We have our 5th canonical John Connor in Christian Bale, who spends the movie alternately mumbling and screaming at the top of his lungs, sometimes at directors of photography who wander into his line of sight. Bale is criminally wasted here, and it's easy to tell in his eyes that he's lost in this role. He's giving his usual 140 billion% to a character that essentially lacks any drive or core. The same goes to Anton Yelchin, who is saddled with the second most boring portrayal of Kyle Reese in the saga. It should be a crime to waste Bale or Yelchin, especially when your main character is as flimsy as Marcus Wright, whose entire story can be summed up as, "I killed my brother. I deserve to die. Where am I? Who are you?" Metal Gear. I'm a monster! It's a trap! Strong heart, strong heart, strong heart, sacrifice, strong heart, dead. He's a one-and-done protagonist in the way that Kyle Reese is a one-and-done protagonist, except Sam Worthington is very much not Michael Biehn. Also, his romance with Moon Bloodgood, fun name to say by the way, is about as tacked on as you can get. Who directed this grim, dreary, gray, loud, kind of gorgeous but ultimately inconsequentially stupid movie? It's everybody's favorite director with no vowels. McG. Hacky. That joke's hacky. Pointing out this joke as hacky is also hacky. Shameless. The Sugar Ray collaborator turned music video director turned Charlie's Angels whiz kid was convinced that this movie was going to be his Apocalypse Now. He was seeing the overly blue-screened action in science fiction films and was like, enough! I'm going to do it all, for real! He of course had almost no experience doing this kind of intense action and got a whole lot of people hurt. In an interview with Sci-Fi, McG had this to say about the, kind of extremely dangerous nature of the production. Yeah, I mean, our special effects guy, a guy named Mike Menardis, who did Tropic Thunder and did our film, basically had his leg severed off and they had to reattach it. He was hit by one of his own special effects. You know that Christian broke his hand, Sam hurt his back, everybody really took their licks. We built all the sets, the explosive power so you feel that wind and that percussion and that heat blowing your eyebrows off. With that, you get a couple of bumps and bruises on the way, but you get it in an integrity and a realism that hopefully echoes Apocalypse Now. You couldn't say, let's just shoot Apocalypse Now in Burbank, I think it's going to feel just as good. No way! You had to go there and lose your mind, and Martin Sheen had to have a heart attack, and you had to fire Harvey Keitel, and you had, to have the rebels take your helicopters and tsunamis blow down your sets. That's the grit that gave the film the realism that blew us all away. To that I say, McG. Sweet, simple, probably at some point in the 90s frosted-tipped McG. You seem to have forgotten one important thing about this whole endeavor. You're McG! The only thing of value McG has ever done, and I mean this with all earnestness, is co-write the Sugar Ray song Fly. That being said, there's an admirable grit and grime to Terminator Salvation. The problem is that it doesn't do anything with it. For all of its high-caliber talent, the film is listless. With no narrative direction, each weirdly stitched together sequence feels like an excuse to show off a moderately impressively constructed set piece. The origin of the Terminator franchise was born into slasher tropes, but T2 shifted into sci-fi action fairly seamlessly. On paper, the transition from T3 to Terminator Salvation should have worked, but it's hampered by its focus on ancillary characters who are given no development. Fans clamored for a future war movie since the brief, tantalizing moments of T1 and T2, but when they got it, it was like going to a buffet and only filling your plate with pie. Turns out you get a tummy ache. If Terminator Salvation had been successful, it would have been the start of an intriguing, if not inspiring, franchise. With the no-fate theme of T2 firmly and finally squashed, Terminator Salvation had an opportunity to close this strange, endless causal loop. It finally had the chance to tell us the story of how Kyle Reese and John Connor became friends and allies, and show the pain that leads to John sending Kyle to his doom. In what can only be described as a grand-scale first for a franchise, it had the opportunity to be both sequel and prequel, something that provided interesting context and an exciting conclusion. Unfortunately, it did neither, and the relative failure of this hugely expensive boondoggle set the franchise back another half-decade, where the rights were sold again, this time to Megan Ellison, the head of Annapurna Pictures. She sold those rights to her brother David Ellison, who owns Skydance Media, and this train got rolling yet again. And they made a direct sequel to Terminator Salvation, and the rest is history, right? Wait, no, they made a massively complicated movie that managed to make old fans angry and new viewers confused? Oh boy. Prepare yourself. It's time for... Woo! This one's weird. First off, let's get the hacky joke out of the way. That title, my god, it's like it's designed to misspell and mispronounce. It's tailor-made to give your phone's autocorrect an aneurysm. Genisys. Weird to say out loud. It's just Genisys. I'm saying Genisys. With his career in politics done, Arnold started ramping up his involvement in film again. He took roles in smaller movies where he got to flex his other muscles for once, the acting ones. A lot of these smaller Arnie flicks are pretty compelling, but they didn't really make any money. Maybe because they were little indie things, and maybe because his star had fallen somewhat. Probably a combination of the two. But he always wanted to return to the Terminator franchise, and it's easy to see why. He loves playing that character, it defines his brand as a person. People literally called him the Governator while he was in office, it's a whole thing. But at this point, Arnold was in his mid-60s. This forever young machine was starting to show some wear and tear, and the digital effects that allowed him a brief quote-unquote cameo in Salvation still weren't quite ready for a full film. Nevertheless, he signed on to the new project, which was still in search of a script and a director. Originally, this was going to be directed by Fast and Furious wunderkind Justin Lin, which would have been a mess, but the kind of mess I probably would have paid good money to see. The job was offered to a handful of ludicrously high-profile directors, including my main man Rian Johnson, as well as Denis Villeneuve, because who doesn't want a 3-hour, somber, meditative Terminator movie shot by Roger Deakins? I said that as a joke initially, but I could go for a 3-hour, somber, meditative Terminator movie shot by Roger Deakins. Man. Eventually, they settled, on Alan Taylor. And if you say, who? When I say this name, I'm not surprised. He directed a bunch of prestige dramas for HBO, including Game of Thrones and The Sopranos, and he also directed the worst of the Marvel movies, Thor: The Dark World. So, not inspiring, huh? Weird gray mishmash of a movie incoming? Well, kinda? This may be somewhat blasphemous, but I think Genisys is a great time. It's dumb as a bag of very dumb things, but it's also fun, zippy, and never boring. But it also does something that was destined to fail from the start. It tried to perform a soft reboot on the series that placed it in a parallel timeline from the other Terminator films. We have a new John Connor, played by Jason Clarke, who always has the weirdest energy, and a new Kyle Reese, played by, I'm gonna say, Jai Courtney, I swear it's like static looking at all these bland beef boys. And a new Sarah Connor. Emilia Clarke, best known for portraying Daenerys Targaryen on Game of Thrones, is the only one of the new cast members to really set herself apart here. While Jason Clarke and Jai Courtney are aggressively bland and forgettable, Emilia Clarke really adds some fun dimension to Sarah Connor, somehow blending the disparate elements of the wide-eyed naivete of Linda Hamilton in 1984 and the efficient, heartless, damaged soldier of 1991 Linda Hamilton. That being said, Linda Hamilton she ain't. She just feels like a kid. She's 29 playing 19 in Genisys, but she plays the role like a teenager, and Arnold slots in as her dad. Yep, Terminator is dad, we're doing that one again. But this time, more literally. You see, this movie upends the Monopoly board and decides that it's going to build its own timeline. Seems like they took the no fate but what we make mantra maybe a little too literally. On the eve of total victory against Skynet, Kyle Reese is sent back to 1984 to protect/totally fall in love with Sarah Connor. That's where everything changes, though. We got T-1000s chasing Kyle around, we got multiple T-800s, and Sarah Connor, far from the scared waitress Kyle was led to expect, is instead a badass sniper rifle-toting Terminator hunter with her T-800 father by her side. What follows is deeply convoluted, often silly, and intensely slick. It's the only Terminator film to get a PG-13 rating, and it wears that on its sleeve. It has all of the bombast and spectacle of a Marvel movie, and a lot of that same quips but not jokes quality. My house is made entirely of extremely thin glass, so I'm going to keep that stone in my pocket. The problem here, though, is that it's extremely beholden to Terminator 1 and 2. For a film that's trying so desperately to carve its own path towards rebooting the franchise, it's almost mandatory that you're familiar with the dynamics of the first two Terminator films to make this one make even a little bit of sense. It uses visual cues and camera setups from the first two films liberally as little callbacks and gags, but they always feel weird, jokey, but also reverent and airless simultaneously. Like, no matter where we go in this series, we're always going to be locked in the same loop. The same aesthetic decisions, the same designs, the same dynamics, and the same themes. Oddly though, this is one of the few Terminator franchise extenders that seemingly had a plan. Within its ludicrous ending is contained a genuine sense of forward momentum that could have let this little mini-trilogy stand on its own and deliver some pulpy big-budget thrills, even if those thrills weren't necessarily thematically interesting or resonant in any way. We could have done worse than a Genisys trilogy. But that just wasn't meant to be. Because while Genisys was a soft hit worldwide, it failed to make any traction at the US box office, which left Skydance scrambling, as it only had access to the rights until 2019, when the series was set to revert to James Cameron and Galen Hurd's ownership due to a strange loophole in copyright law. Plans for a sequel were scrapped, and once again the franchise was forced to start from scratch as they looked for a way forward for reasons that weren't creative or financial, but purely contractual. At the end of this long road, they made a decision they hoped would save their investment. They gave James Cameron a call and asked for his help. And if there's one character James Cameron loves more than any other he's ever created, it's Sarah Connor. The Lego sequel is probably the biggest gamble in franchise revival. If you get it right, it serves as a solid passing of the torch from one generation to the next, and then you got Star Wars in your hands. If you get it wrong, though, you can tarnish the legacy of the old movies and make the new one look dumb in comparison. But if you look at the legacy of the Terminator franchise, you can see how this was always the final option for this series. At this point, Terminator has been tried in so many different ways and with such mixed results that a series that was built on subverting the tropes of the slasher genre had essentially become the thing it was critiquing. Each film had lower stakes, less investment, and diminishing returns both critically and financially. But with the success of something like 2018's Halloween, it was easy to see why Cameron and company chose this route. Let's bring back Sarah Connor, the secret weapon of the franchise, and pretend that every terrible sequel never happened. A direct sequel that ignores the previous continuity while handing off the franchise to an entirely new generation of heroes, though? It's a tough needle to thread, and the folks they got to thread it weren't really up to the challenge. Tim Miller is a bad director. Is that a hot take? I really liked Deadpool. It's a fun movie, but it's directed terribly. It's a good script, executed competently, but it has the visual imagination of a brown paper bag, and a lot of that brown paper bagness transfers over to Dark Fate. And the script as it is filled with a grab bag of muddled ideas that came from an elaborate writer's room process that passed through terrible screenwriters like David S. Goyer, amazing mercenaries like Billy Ray, who rewrote a giant portion of the film, the creator of the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which I really haven't mentioned in this video mostly because I'm only concerned with the iconography of the films, and then endless tinkering by Tim Miller and James Cameron themselves. What results from this is a movie that's serving a lot of different masters. The film has some amazing ideas in it. It's truly wonderful to see Linda Hamilton back playing Sarah Connor as a kind of dead-hearted ghost that can't deal with her tragic past. Arnold Schwarzenegger is wonderful as a Terminator who's tried to blend in with humans so long that he's almost become one, but is very much aware of his otherness. And Natalia Reyes' Danny Ramos, the new future leader of the human resistance, is really empathetic and capable in the action scenes. Dark Fate even simplifies the plot to fashion itself more like Terminator 1. There's no grand plot to save humanity, they're not trying to stop Legion, the AI that replaces Skynet in this new elongated timeline. They're just trying to save one person who can save the world. All the big stuff can wait for the sequel.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
It has a great message and a ton of fun action sequences, but it's also overstuffed with characters. We have Arnold, Linda Hamilton, and Mackenzie Davis as protectors for Danny Ramos, and it just feels like the three of them are having their own little movie triangle around Danny, which leads to her losing a lot of agency in the film. The film also ends with all but Danny and Sarah dead, so it almost seems pointless to have both Mackenzie Davis and Arnold Schwarzenegger playing protector roles. You can only have one really big, noble sacrifice moment, you know? Arnold's big sacrifice for Sarah cheapens the grim, sad fate of Mackenzie Davis's Grace. The solution would be to not have Schwarzenegger in this at all and save him for a cameo or tease him for the sequel, but when you've got Arnold and you're spending $185 million, you use Arnold. This muddled characterization is also apparent in the villain, played by Gabriel Luna. He's just another liquidy Terminator boy. He has no real menace, but he carries himself well in the action scenes. Because we already know the threat of Skynet/Legion, his shtick is boring. He's not some all-powerful, unkillable, hulking, relentless maniac like in the Terminator, or the cool, calculated, controlling representation of intelligent authority like in T2. He's just an obstacle that needs to be overcome. Even though this film was handled by Cameron personally, the death of John Connor and the reset of the Skynet-Legion cycle tramples the heart of Terminator 2 in much the same way that Alien 3 smothered the life out of the hope of aliens. The future of this particular trilogy of Terminator films would have worked in about the same way as Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Fate does exist. You're chosen by it for reasons you can't explain. You can't really change the ultimate fate of the world, but you can kick that can down the road for a while. And if you manage to get lucky, you can kick that can so hard that it becomes somebody else's problem further down the road. It's tough to really get a sense of catharsis out of that, you know? Dark Fate was marketed poorly too, to say the least. We had exactly one trailer for what felt like a year and a half, and it seemingly played in front of every movie I saw in theaters in 2019. If I ever hear that cover of Bjork's Hunter ever again, I'm gonna scream. I'm going hunting, I'm the hunter. It also opened in early November, which is wild because this thing is so distinctly a summer movie, but it was also co-released by Paramount and 20th Century Fox, which was at that point transitioning to Disney, so there's probably some weird politics involved there. This is the first Terminator movie to out-and-out flop, though. You can explain away soft success with T3 through T5, but at this point it was undeniable. The franchise had finally run out of gas. The biggest shame in all of this is that I genuinely believe that they finally had most of the pieces right. Linda Hamilton was the secret glue that held the franchise together, and she was hiding in plain sight. Her arc is the arc of the Terminator films, and when she's not in them, the story is listless. As of this video, there are no current plans to make a sequel to Dark Fate. It just wouldn't make any financial sense. So, for the time being, it looks like the Terminator franchise has finally been terminated. You see, I told you I was waiting for that pun. You didn't trust me. So, what's next? At this point, there's just about nothing left to do with the Terminator franchise. It may have outlived its usefulness. But listen and understand. That Terminator franchise is out there, and it can still make money. Hollywood can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until it wrings every last dollar out of every intellectual property it controls. That being said, there's something to the story of a woman who has to find the courage within herself to survive the constant barrage of evil from the future. Where the last film succeeded, a new film could blossom. It may sound blasphemous, but there's one way left to save the Terminator series. And you're gonna hate it. 6 Terminator films, 6 eras of Hollywood, 6 different visions on how to craft a franchise. It's apparent that Hollywood isn't going to leave Terminator alone. It can't. The Terminator films are just too iconic. But we can get back to the roots that made the franchise profitable in the first place. With budgets constantly ballooning, Terminator became a victim of its own success and James Cameron's own excess. But the directors that followed Cameron? Nowhere near his caliber. They all seem like budget-conscious picks, people who can toe the line. I don't think anyone's ever used the term visionary when referring to Jonathan Mostow, McGee, Alan Taylor, or Tim Miller. That's not necessarily a failing on their parts. The world needs journeyman directors, but every one of them seems like a compromise. Terminator 2 set the record for the most expensive movie ever made at the time, but it also made so much money that it convinced every Hollywood studio that got their hands on the rights that the only way to make money was to escalate. Keep raising the stakes, keep throwing more effects at the screen, keep paying Arnold's ever-increasing salary. But if you look to director Leigh Whannell and his films Upgrade and The Invisible Man, which were both shot on around $5 million but look like they were made for at least $40, it's easy to see that the future of science fiction could lie in its past. My pitch is simple. Wait 5 years, scrap everything, and then you start again from the beginning of all of this. Return to the sci-fi horror roots, get a promising young director who can make a lot with a little and a cast of no-names. Find a new rising action actor to become the new face of Terminators for a generation. But also maybe get rid of the idea of John Connor altogether. It's Sarah Connor that needs to save the world. It's on her shoulders. Give her the authority and the agency, and maybe that simplifies this whole affair and lets some of the time travel stuff be less convoluted. Basically, you take the stuff that really worked out of Dark Fate and you tell a story unburdened by damn near 40 years of canon. Also, it's the 21st century, so we can do a lot with phone tracking and CCTV and higher-end tech paranoia that's pretty easy to do on the cheap. Don't involve big military set pieces. Smaller-scale, intimate physical and psychological horror are way more effective in a marketplace that's just oversaturated by efficient explosion delivery machines disguising themselves as feature-length motion pictures. Speaking of which, shoot it on no more than $25 million. Make it grimy and cheap and only use one kind of Terminator. From there, go bananas with what you can do within the limitations. Make it visceral. Will this happen? Probably not. Now that James Cameron owns the rights again, I imagine he'll probably lock this thing down as long as humanly possible until some genius writer comes at him with a fresh idea. That being said, you see studios like Universal and Blumhouse having great success with this kind of low-risk, huge-reward production model, and it's not like it would damage the legacy of the franchise any more than 30 years of studio mismanagement has already done. So it's anybody's guess what comes next. Is the Terminator franchise worth saving, though? I'd say so. There's something sticky about the idea. This thought that anyone can be plucked from obscurity to become the most important person in history. The thought that the only thing standing between humanity and annihilation is an acknowledgement of our own shared struggle. It's also a wonderful, ever-present reinforcement of this fear of the nebulous, unknown future of technology. Like atomic power before it, artificial intelligence represents the greatest opportunity to change the world for the better, but also the greatest power to destroy the world as we know it. And in that way, maybe it's true that the future is not set. But maybe it's time to accept Terminator's fate. While I'm always in favor of seeing new versions of the things I love, it's also a reminder that the more we recycle these old ideas, the further we get away from their impact. We keep adapting the old fears and old ideas at the expense of seeing the new. Like James Cameron before them, someone out there is having a nightmare right now. A vision of something gut-wrenchingly archetypically terrifying that can only be told on the big screen. It's time to let them tell that story, because we'll never see the future if we keep reliving the past. Thank you for watching Too Many Tapes. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. If you have $1 a month you can spare to help me fund more content like this, please check out my Patreon. Every dollar I raise goes directly into funding the show. The link is in the description. If you donate $10 or more a month, you're a Terminator 2, because you're perfect and untouchable, and you get to be in this huge Terminator-themed font for this month. And if you donate $5 a month, you're Sarah Connor, the glue that keeps this thing together. You also get early access to videos. When we come back, we're going to take a look at a television series that has haunted me since childhood. Next time on Too Many Tapes, Tomes and Talismans. Wearing a jacket in the summer and my AC is off.